Glad to see you this morning. We got a couple of visitors anyway. I tried to get one of them to teach the class today, but Bob just says, you go ahead and give it a shot. So we'll try. I imagine most of us, I know I have, I'll hold up my hand first, have had a case of hoof and mouth disease during our lifetime. And Wednesday night, we saw a bad case of that with the people of the Ephraimites. In fact, I think they even had a little worse case than just hoof and mouth disease. They had a little problem with maybe telling the truth. Freddie went over this real quickly at the end of our lesson, but if you look at chapter 12, Judges chapter 12, when they came complaining about not being asked to come and help fight against the Ammonites, look at verse 2. And Jephthah said unto them, I and my people were at great strife with the children of Ammon. And when I called you, ye delivered me not out of their hands. And when I saw that ye delivered me not, I put my life in my hands and passed over against the children of Ammon. And the Lord delivered them into my hand. Wherefore then are you come up unto me this day to fight against me? So, not only were they not willing to go and help, but they were actually bringing up a situation they had no business talking about. So, they had their chance. So sometimes, I guess we stick our nose in people's business when we ought to have our mouth shut. And so we need to be careful about that. Okay, today though, we'll be looking at the rest of chapter 12 and most of chapter 13 and 14, centered around the next four men listed as the judges, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, and Samson. And we'll just begin our study on Samson today. Freddie will finish that Wednesday night. But there's very little given about these three judges. Two of them probably lived in Zebulun, and I say probably. The first one's not really clear, but that particular Bethlehem, usually the other Bethlehem is identified as Bethlehem, Judah, Bethlehem, Ephraim. So this one is probably up in the northern tribe of Zebulun, Ibzan. But he had 30 sons, 30 daughters, and he actually sends his daughters away to get husbands and brings in wives from other places for his sons. I would say contrary to God's will. Not marrying people from within the children of Israel. Judged for 7 years. That's about all we know about him. But probably quietness during his particular reign. Elon is actually listed as being from Zebulun. And all we know about him is the fact that he judged for 10 years. We're told where he died, and the fact that he was buried in Zebulun also. Abdon, another one of those that don't have much information about. Other than the fact he had 40 sons, 30 grandsons, and they rode around on 70 donkeys. Again, indicating maybe a man of wealth. But he judged for 8 years and probably also quiet years during the central part of the land of Israel, the land of Ephraim. It only lists him as being from the city of Parathon, but that was in the country of Ephraim, a few miles from Shechem. Of course, you remember Shechem was located up on the border between Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay, but as we get into chapter 13, we see the sad story that is repeated time and time and time again. Israel doing evil in the sight of the Lord. And of course, this time it's the enemy of the Philistines. Of course, the Philistines are located over on the coast near the Mediterranean Sea, most of the time down in the land of Judah or up toward the land of Dan in that general area. And we find out that they did oppress the children of Israel for a period of 40 years. So going back to last week, we talked about some oppressors coming in. If you go back to Judges chapter 10, I believe it is verse 7, maybe, talks about the oppressors being the Ammonites, the Philistines. Chapter 10, verse 7. The anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, sold them into the hands of the Philistines and into the hands of the children of Ammon. So we talked last week. It seems as if maybe this was all happening the same time frame. The story of Jephthah actually centers on the fight against the Ammonites. Of course, we know that the Ammonites had said they actually came over into Benjamin, down into Judah and Ephraim. So they came across the Jordan. But apparently, and this may have been what Jephthah was talking about when these people came and said, well, how come you didn't call us? Well, I was being sorely pressed by the Ammonites, and I asked you because, they were in Ephraim, but you didn't volunteer to help. And now you are accusing me of not calling you. So I think all of this is kind of intertwined time-wise. So Jephthah, he dealt with the Ammonites. And I think today we're going to see the other side of that, beginning the fight against the Philistines under Samson. Now, as we get into Samson, we'll just kind of back up just a minute and talk about a few things we know about Samson. Not necessarily good things. Yet he's going to be listed in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32, along with Jephthah, Gideon, and so forth. We know if you go over in the 14th chapter, and we'll get there in a minute, this wedding feast, he actually has a bet with 30 of the companions there. He's gambling, so to speak. Also, we know that he chose a wife from the Philistines the first time and then the second time also. So he married a wife contrary to God's will of not marrying foreign wives. Also in chapter 16, we see that he actually makes a visit to a harlot. So, how do we reconcile the fact that he's listed as a hero of faith? I'm not sure I have the explanation, and unfortunately the Bible doesn't give us all the answers. But as I looked over in chapter 11, flip over there just a minute. I went over there and I was looking at those verses, and I got to reading down a couple of verses beyond 32, where it describes some of the things that these people did. I'll drop this yet. Verse 34, talking about, said they quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword. And this is the phrase I centered in on. Out of weakness were made strong. If you remember the story of Samson, I don't want to take too much of what Freddie will do Wednesday night. But you remember at the end of his life, or at least toward the end of his life, when Delilah keeps pestering him daily about, why don't you reveal where your strength comes from? He finally says, look, I've been faithful all my life to keep the Nazarite vow. The strength is in the hair. If you shave my head, then I have no strength. Goes to sleep, wakes up, tries to break the ties again. This time he's not able to do so because his strength is gone. His eyes he's punched out, he's blinded, put into prison, made essentially a beast of burden, having to grind out grain and so forth. We don't know how long that particular part of his life entails, but it does say that his hair had begun to grow again, so we know there was some length of time that he was being punished at the hands of the Philistines. Also, we know that he reigned or ruled for 20 years as judge. So how long was he in prison in the hands of the Philistines? So we don't know. But I just imagine this man had a lot of time to think about his life and so forth. At that point, as they were celebrating their worship to their God, he said, God, give me one more chance. Give me my strength back. I think that may be the key. In weakness, at the time he was the weakest physically, he became strong spiritually. Comments? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah. I think so. Yeah. The point you're making. Look at David, man after God's own heart. Didn't cover up the fact that he sinned. Big time. All right. Okay. All right. Now, as I indicated earlier, possibly Jephthah and Samson and maybe even Eli, their reigns kind of overlap because we know Eli had to deal with the Philistines and all the way into the time of David. The Philistines were really a thorn in Israel's flesh. So if you look at verse 5 of chapter 13, it mentions the fact that when the angel was talking to Samson's mother, he said, it'd be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hands of the Philistines. So he's not going to completely deliver them as maybe some of the other oppressors, but and there's something on the bottom of the slide I didn't quite get there. But but he does begin to deliver them from the hands of the Philistines. Okay. Now, this is what we were talking about earlier. The judges, maybe that we talked about from up in Zebulun and down from this area here. But as we are introduced to the potential of God delivering his people again, we're told that there was a family who lived down along the border of Dan and Judah. Manoah lived in the city of Zorah, and he was a Danite, as a matter of fact, according to verse 2 of chapter 13. Said his wife was barren. I think it's kind of interesting that, what's her name? Anybody know her name? The Bible never says anything about her name. It always refers to her as the woman or his wife, Manoah's wife. So we don't know who Samson's mother, what her name was. But like we did Hannah, or some of those who, and we have no indication either on this lady that she was actually praying to God, asking that she have a child, as Hannah did in the case of Samuel. But the angel of the Lord does appear to her to inform her that she would, in fact, have a son. And he uses the words, beware. Beware. He said, listen to me. Listen to me now. There's some constraints that you're going to have to be aware of. In fact, you're not to drink anything from the vine, any strong drink, or eat anything unclean, according to verse 4. And he said, verse 5, as we read just a minute ago, no razor would touch his head. He would be a Nazarite from birth. Now, how come I didn't put that chart up there where you could be looking at it while I was talking? I can't do two things at once. But that's kind of the list of things. He said, you have some constraints on you, as well as there will be a constraint on your son. Don't know much about Nazarite vows. We'll go back to Numbers chapter 6. There are a list of vows or requirements given there. But it seems to me like those have to do with short-term vows. Not cutting the hair, having anything to do with great products, not touching dead bodies, and so forth. The only other people that I'm aware of listed in the Bible, other than Samson, that talks about being Nazarite from birth, would be Samuel. And I think Freddie mentioned that the other night. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 11, it says, no razor would touch his head. John the Baptist over in Luke chapter 1, verse 15, neither wine or strong drink. So those are the three, quote, Nazarite vows that I'm aware of in the New Testament that maybe dealt with the entire life. Does anybody have any comment or additions to that? Okay. But we know this particular man was bound by that particular restriction, not having a razor come to his head. So as this angel comes to Manoah's wife, there's quite a lengthy discussion that takes place, and it fills up the rest of chapter 13. Manoah was not around at the time this encounter happened, but she tells him about that particular situation and tells him about what the angel had said concerning her and also the son that would be born. So he prays that the angel will actually come again. And he doesn't just say, I'd like for him to come. There's a reason he wanted him to come. Look at what he said in verse 8. He says, won't you come again and teach us what we shall do unto the child that shall be born? So there's no doubt on his part that it's going to happen. He wants to know what should we do when it happens. And so God allows the angel to come back and visit again. But again, he comes when she and Manoah are not together. But this time, according to verse 10, she runs and gets her husband. And so Manoah gets to see the angel and ask him, are you really the one that came and spoke to the woman? Of course, the answer was yes. Then he begins to ask questions about the son that would come. Kind of interesting, the angel doesn't just say, okay, here's the answer to all of your questions. But yet he turns right around and makes the same statements that he had made to the woman earlier, in verses 13 and 14. And again, he begins with a warning. The angel said unto Manoah, of all that I said unto the woman, let her beware. She may not eat of anything that cometh of the vine, neither let her drink wine or any strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing. All that I command her, let her observe. So he reiterates exactly what is expected of this woman as she is about to bring this son into the world. So, Manoah, he's anxious for the angel to stay, have a meal with him, and so forth. And the angel does stay. But when the meal has been prepared, the angel doesn't eat any of the food. In fact, when he says, now, when you get ready to offer this burnt offering, you make sure you offer it to Jehovah, not me. Not me. So that's what is done. Then Manoah, he said, well, what's your name? He said, it's a secret. It's a secret. But in verse 19, we're going to see he does something wondrously whenever this goat and meal is offered up. Then fire appears and the angel goes up into heaven in the flame of the offering. And that's when Manoah begins to fear. He said, I'm afraid we're going to die. But his wife has a pretty good logical head on her. She said, now think about it. Look at verse 23. His wife said, now if the Lord were pleased to kill us, he would not have received a burnt offering and a meat offering at our hands. Neither would he have sworn unto us all these things, nor would as at this time have told us such things as these. So she said, just think about it. I don't think God's going to kill us. He could have if he wanted to. But think about the things that have happened. I don't believe we're going to be killed. And of course, they were not. In verses 24 and 25, though, we see Samson being born. child grew, the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to move him at times in the camp of Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. So we see at this moment in time, at least this period of time, God is pleased with this young man or young boy that's been born and is growing into manhood. Now, as we get into chapter 14, though, we're going to see Samson, at least as a mature man by this time, because he goes down into the Philistine country, down just a little bit south of where he lived. And he sees a nice-looking young lady there. And he wants this woman to be his wife. Well, Mama and Daddy are not real happy about this because she is, in fact, a Philistine, not one of their own people. But we see Samson, he's saying, get her for me. He's set on getting this woman because she pleases me. But what's going on, nobody really understands, or they didn't understand exactly what God had in mind for this particular man and his relationship to the Philistine nation. Because if you look at verse 4, it said, but his father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord that he sought an occasion against the Philistines. For at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. So God has something in mind for Samson relative to the Philistine nation and so forth. And I don't understand all I know about that, but his parents were not aware that maybe God was going to use Samson to begin delivering these people, even though the angel had told the woman that back before he was born. Yeah, Freddie points out that not only at this point, where we may not quite understand all we know about it, God is using Samson and his relationship to these Philistines to bring justice or bring his people out from under oppression. And they use nations throughout the course of history, not necessarily righteous nations, but nations to punish his people or bring them back into his way. All right. But on the way down to visit this woman and her family, Samson actually kills this lion with his bare hands, just like it was a young goat. Nothing to it. But he doesn't tell his parents about it. He continues on down to Timnah, and he talks with this woman, and it said, and she pleased him well, verse 7. So there's maybe the beginning. Maybe he saw her to start with. Now he's talked to her, and in a moment we will see that he's actually going to go down and actually marry the woman. So we see him going down again, this time to actually take his wife, take this woman for his wife. But on the way down, he goes by the same place where he killed this lion before. and a swarm of bees had come in and built, made honey and so forth. He takes some of the honey out, eats it, gives some to his parents also, but he doesn't tell them where he got that honey. I'm not a beekeeper, don't want to be a beekeeper. I want to be as far away from bees as I can be. But those who know a little bit about bees say that it's uncommon that you find a swarm of bees around a dead body, which, if you think about that, that may have made his riddle a little bit more difficult for these people to understand or solve. So think about that as we get into the riddle here in a minute. Okay, so they're having a feast, as the custom was. Father's gone down with him to help arrange for the wedding. And so the feast is going on for 7 days, and it's during this time that I talked about earlier, where Samson poses a riddle to those 30 young men who had been brought in to be his companions during the feast and so forth. And he essentially says, now if you can solve this, I'm going to give you 30 linen garments or 30 sheets and 30 changes of clothes. But if you don't, then you're going to get to give that much to me. And they said, all right, let's have at it. Tell us this riddle. So here it is. Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. Well, as I said, that fact that honeybees don't normally build something in a dead body might have contributed to the fact that they didn't understand this. Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of something strong came something sweet. So they try to solve it for 3 days, and they're just not able to come up with an answer at all. So what do? We're going to resort to talking to his wife. Not only are we going to talk to her, we're going to say, look, if you don't tell us the answer to this thing, we're going to burn your father's house along with you. Now they're playing for keeps. Well, I think I'd have been just like the woman. I said, come on now, give me the answer to this thing. I'm not ready to be burned, and I sure don't want my father's house to be burned. Well, Samson gives her an answer, and men, I want y'all to listen real carefully to this. He said, I hadn't even told my mother and father. So why should I tell you? Now, you know, we may always be right, but we ain't always going to be happy. So let's be careful how we answer our wives sometimes. But that's what he told her. He said, I hadn't even told my mother and father. In other words, I haven't told anybody. So why should I be telling you? So she goes ahead and tells the Philistines, as you would expect her to do. Of course, they know the answer to the riddle then. So Samson is now bound to give them the 30 sheets and changes of clothes. Of course, he just takes off over to the next town. He just goes down to Decatur and gives him 30 people and takes their raiment and so forth and brings them back to Athens and gives them to these guys. But he is not a happy camper, because it said he just goes back home, basically in a rage. And so then we see his father-in-law. Said Samson's father. I think it's Samson's father-in-law, maybe. Anyway, the woman's dad gives her to Samson's best friend for a wife. And of course, that was not a very smart thing to do on his part, because we'll find out Wednesday night why that was not a smart move on his part. But can you imagine a man who just went over and killed 30 people and brought 30 changes of clothes back, passed them out to all the companions of the wedding, and then you give his wife away without letting him know you're going to do that? This man was not much smarter than I am. Okay, that's about where we're going to end today, but this is where Samson went to get those. He goes right over on the coast to Ashkelon and kills those 30 people. Comments, questions about the lesson today? All right. Okay. Right. Yeah. 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 They solved it on the seventh day with her help, and he knew how they got the answer. Yeah. Brady makes a point. These guys would probably never figured it out, but they actually went and talked to his wife. He said, "You flouted my effort. Or would you talk to my wife?" And that's why you know the answer to the riddle. So as a result, he's pretty upset. Yeah, she was between a rock and a hard place. Yeah, she's gonna lose her family if she didn't reveal the answer. So, very difficult situation for her. All right, other comments? All right, Wednesday night we'll hopefully finish the story of Samson.